Hi everyone, I'm Norm, your community liaison for Species at Risk, here in Manitoba's Tallgrass Prairie Natural Area. This winter has been a fairly cold one with a lot of deep snow, and I know a lot of us locals are really looking forward to the spring. But have you ever stopped to think, how do some of these species that we live alongside get through these tough Manitoban winters? On this episode, I'm going to be going over some of the different ways that our species at risk survive out here in southeastern Manitoba. So I suppose the easiest thing that species can do to get away from the cold is simply to leave. So all of our birds that are species at risk do migrate to some extent. Now, birds like the short-eared owl and the red-headed woodpecker can very rarely but occasionally be seen in Manitoba during the winter, but that's sort of few and far between. On the other extreme of it, birds like the bobolink is our longest migrant, and it can go as far south as southern Argentina. So if you were to add up all the distance of a bobolink traveling throughout its lifetime, it would be roughly like circumnavigating the globe 5 times, which is really quite impressive. Now, equally as impressive as that is the migration that another one of our species at risk does, and that's the monarch butterfly. So this insect is about the weight of a paper clip, and it makes its way all the way down to central Mexico, where they overwinter. The other insect, the Pauschik skipperling butterfly, that makes our species at risk list, doesn't migrate, but actually stays right here in the tallgrass prairie to overwinter. They do this as sort of a dormant larval stage. So they cling to the underside of grass and usually let the snow and other vegetation insulate them from the cold until it warms up, and then they continue their growth cycle. We have to remember that underneath all this deep snow, there still exists life. So a lot of that is in the form of vegetation. Our species at risk that are flowers like the orchids, the rare orchids that we have here, they survive under this as perennials, so meaning they survive year to year. They do this by using that deep snow as sort of an insulation, and they survive as more or less a really thick, sturdy root system that allows them to store nutrients and use them for later on when it warms up. Now, our most easy to observe species at risk is flora as well, but it doesn't hide under the snow. It has to withstand all these cold temperatures and winds right in the open. So that's the black ash. So black ash and a lot of deciduous trees in Manitoba have a few different ways that they deal with surviving the cold. So during the decreasing daylight, this sort of triggers adaptation on a cellular level. So which the tree will slowly start to shut down all non-essential functions, therefore saving energy. So the one that comes to mind for us right away is probably when trees drop their leaves. So they do this to help save, they don't need as much water, that sort of thing. But what you might not know is that before they drop the leaves, the tree will actually reabsorb any remaining nutrients out of those leaves, store them in their root system for later. Now the black ash also has a fairly thick bark that helps to keep it insulated as well. When we think about how wildlife tends to try to escape these winter climates, the most common thing that we might think of is hibernation. Now, none of our species at risk hibernate, but there are a few that do things that are really similar to hibernation. So the American badger enters into a state of torpor. Now, this is sort of like light hibernation. The body temperature, metabolic rate, and a few other bodily functions, they all really slow down, but just not to as great a drop as a true hibernator would. So they don't go fully dormant, and they can more easily wake up. Torpor is thought to be of a little bit less involuntary and is more condition dependent. Now, reptiles like the snapping turtle and amphibians like the northern leopard frog do something called brumation. Now, the key difference between brumation and hibernation is that in brumation, the species will not actually eat before they go into their winter dormancy. So this really makes sense if we think about it, because these are cold-blooded creatures, so they need the warm weather to help them to get through that digestive process. We're really fortunate here in the tall grass prairie of Manitoba to have such varied wildlife. And these varied ways that the species at risk use to survive this harsh climate only adds more respect for me for this wildlife. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode, and if you have any questions or comments, please be in contact with me. So we'll see you on the next episode.